Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Zanae Dames, the Marketing and Events Manager at Digital, and I'm pleased to welcome you to AI is Changing Everything, Navigating Your Organization's AI Adoption Journey, another fantastic subject as part of our webinar series at Digital. Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that in Canada we live, work and learn on the unceded traditional and ancestral land of Indigenous people. As myself and much of the Digital team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we are gathered here on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and let us know in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining us from. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with our audiences in the coming week. If at any point during the session you have a question, please type it into the chat and we'll address them at the end during the Q&A portion. That's it from me, and I'll be handing it over to Jen to get this webinar started. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Zanae. Bonjour, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have attendees joining in from across the country for this month's webinar. Whether you're a new or returning participant to Digital's IP series, we're thrilled that you could join us in for this Thought Leadership Power Hour. Next slide, please. Launched in 2017, Canada's National AI Strategy was the first in the world. Since then, Canada's three national AI institutes, MILA, AMI, and the Vector Institute, play a central role in the pan-Canadian artificial intelligence strategy and in strengthening Canada's leadership in AI. And within the rapidly evolving innovation landscape, the integration of AI has become not just a competitive advantage, but a necessity for organizations seeking to thrive in the digital age. However, this journey towards effective AI adoption can be both daunting and complex. Over these next 60 minutes, we'll walk through AI landscape trends, key considerations when charting a course for your organization as it relates to AI, some lessons learned, and a Q&A to close us out. Next slide, please. Fundamental to the global innovation clusters is collaborative innovation, setting the framework for projects that address cross-country challenges whilst creating technology products and services that can scale across industries and ultimately across the world. Digital's IP strategy supports the development, ownership, and retention of Canadian IP through numerous vehicles, and informational sessions with thought leaders like we've today are one example of that. Next slide, please. I have the pleasure of introducing today's panel. Please join me in welcoming Jeffrey North, Adam White, Andres Rojas, and Frederic Laurent. Frederic is Senior Director of Partnerships at MILA, an experienced business development executive and AI technology leader. He is responsible for building strategic partnerships and collaborations with organizations from around the globe to drive innovation and advance the field of AI. Outside of his day-to-day, he also has a strong interest in mental health and committed to supporting individuals and organizations that work to address mental health challenges. Jeff is Vice President Intellectual Property of IP Ontario, providing leadership and technical oversight of the intellectual property aspects of IPON services and leads client intake. A recognized leader in the field of intellectual property, he has also held positions of legal counsel with a leading edge network company, as well as founder of an IP law firm with global clients in industries which included technology, bioinformatics, pharmaceutical, healthcare, telecommunications, and oil and gas, and has appeared before the Ontario Superior Court, the Federal Court, and the Federal Court of Appeal. Adam is a fellow and Canadian CFAR AI chair at the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute and an assistant professor in computing science at the University of Alberta, where he is principal investigator of the Reinforcement Learning and Artificial Intelligence Lab. Adam is also the creator of a language-independent communication protocol and evaluation framework for reinforcement learning experiments, co-author of the Horde architecture, and a contributor to large-scale demonstrations of learning on mobile robots. And last but not least, Andres is Director of Applied AI Projects at the Vector Institute, where he leads the design and delivery of applied AI projects for 300 industry partners to accelerate the adoption of AI in the Canadian economy. Some key areas of his work include trustworthy AI and its governance and translating AI quirks to the corporate environment. Prior to joining Vector, he was Director Operational Risk, International Banking at Scotiabank, responsible for providing oversight on operational risk across over 30 countries. He is also an advisory board member of the McMaster AI Society. We have a powerhouse panel with us today for this discussion. And with that, Jeff, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jen. First of all, I just wanted to say to everybody here, thank you for attending this webinar. And we are not holding this on Halloween because this is a spooky topic. I can assure you, and I hope that our panel here today will be able to give you some insights about AI to help drive your use of AI going forward. Now, I will share my screen. I have a few slides that I'd like to present just to help drive sort of the conversation. I just want to make sure, can everybody see my screen? Excellent, excellent. Okay. Now, first of all, I may be the VP IP of IPON, Intellectual Property Ontario, but this discussion is not about intellectual property per se. It may creep in here and there in our discussions today, but it is not about that. These experts are not here to talk about that. But IP is very useful in certain respects here, and I think you'll see from my slides. I've got a slide up right now, actually, which is very useful. We've done a landscape report at IPON, and it's going to be released to the public, actually, in the coming weeks and maybe a month from now. And I think you can see from our research, which tells us sort of the patent filings by sector. And it tells you that AI is actually sort of invading every sort of sector or industry. And you can see that there's a lot of patents that have been filed in the medical and life sciences industries, cyber and network security, education, robotics, and gaming. Those make up the top 5, but it actually is now in and used in virtually every industry and sector, of operations for any sort of company in the world. And the reason I put this up here is it's not that patents tell you, everything, but it gives you some good insights as to trends and what people are working on, what sort of technologies. So I just wanted to bring this before our audience so that you can see, where this is exactly being used. And some of the things that are being patented, for instance, which people are working on in their innovations, I've got them up on the screen now. You can see that there's a lot of filings related to neural network architectures, training techniques and applications, computer vision and speech processing. Generative AI is a huge thing nowadays that is a big topic. Knowledge graphs, genetic algorithms, quantum computing AI, and then even we get on the AI hardware side of things, where people are filing and coming up with innovations because they want to achieve enhanced hardware and software integration. So once again, we're not talking today about the IP aspects. I just wanted to get the general sense for our audience, what people are working on out there. So I think we should start the conversation today by asking our 3 panelists who are heavily involved in AI. As an organization, each of you, what AI trends are you seeing with your members, stakeholders, companies, and partners that you're working with? So essentially, what are they working on? And how do you make sure, if you are, that your members are at the forefront of AI trends? And so maybe we'll start with, why don't we start with Frederick on this one?
Yes, well, hello, everyone. Just to maybe give you a bit of an introduction about Mila. For those of you who don't know Mila, so Mila is the AI Research Institute that was founded by Dr. Bengio in 1993. So we actually just turned 30 years old this year. And I'd say at Mila, we're very much agnostic in terms of industries. 75% of what we do is still open research. So most of our professors will be interested in advancing, developing new algorithm, and about 25 to 30% of what we do is more applied research. If we have one area of focus, I guess if this would align with what Jeffrey mentioned, 25 or 30% of the companies with whom we're working with are active in the life science sector, and we have maybe another 20% active in green technology, green tech in general, and for the rest, we're pretty much agnostic in terms of industry.
Andres?
Sure. So on our end, well, just to also provide some context on Vector, we are a relatively new institute compared to both Mila and Amy. So we were founded in 2017, and basically our approach generally is to work with the companies on a collaborative way. Basically, we don't do one-on-ones, we don't do sponsor research, but what we do with them is we try to help them build basically organizational capabilities, if you want, to try to deploy AI. And the point here is that definitely you do need all the technical know-how to build AI, but in addition to that, you also need other things like, for example, the right governance, right? So building those capabilities is not something that happens overnight, because you can hire technical talent that can get you relatively quickly in specific applications to a level where you have something that looks like a product. Now the question is, how do you ensure that that is something that is going to deliver value consistently, that is not going to go basically against the type of values that you are promoting, right? So that type of governance is something that is particularly important. And going back to the original question that Jeffrey asked, that is one of the things that we see more and more, especially large organizations, basically highlighting, which is, yes, we do need the technical side. But in addition to that, what companies have been doing more and more of lately is actually building the right governance tools, building the basically all the capabilities to ensure that you have the ability to audit what you're building, that you're able to explain how things are working, that you're able to ensure that that the final product that you're delivering is aligned to what you actually intend to deliver. And that is not as straightforward with AI as it is with the traditional algorithmic techniques that we've been using that are more that are easier to guide, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Adam.
Yeah, so I'm part of Amy, and of course it's the third center focused on AI and machine learning. I think it's interesting that the centers do a lot of similar things very well, and so it's not like a competition. It's actually, we just cover different regions of Canada, which is really, really beautiful, and they're very much our colleagues. Maybe one thing I'll highlight, because we're doing very similar things, I'll highlight one of the things that I've been part of through Amy that is relevant to this conversation is we've seen a large need for additional AI education and literacy across sectors. Universities definitely provide technical expertise, but we've been introducing programs to help educate parents about AI because they're wondering about it for their kids and what it means for helping their kids decide future career paths. We're developing a course across campus for all students on campus to learn about AI, because traditionally we've taught AI for a long time, but we teach it to computer scientists, right? And so we're trying to build that AI literacy across campus so that people can participate in conversations. And that kind of just leads into this cross-industry, this cross-subject viewpoint that you're putting out here, which is just like, it's coming from everywhere in all directions. And even with my university hat on as a professor, we're hiring 15 professors across campus to work on artificial intelligence and some discipline that they're already in, like physics, chemistry, indigenous studies, those things. And we're really viewing those people as joining the broader Amy family so that we can start collaborating across the university, across traditional department boundaries, so that we can say, how do we revolutionize modeling of the atmosphere in space? How do we revolutionize chemistry with AI? And I think a lot of us are thinking the same way, that it's both an industry piece, an education and awareness piece, but also like revolutionizing what we already do, which is fundamental science.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. That's great. Thank you so much for that. So now I think I'm just going to put up a couple other slides. And this is important because I want to get to a question about what we should be doing here in Canada. If you look at the key players, and once again, this is from a patenting side, but patenting only tells you a little bit of what's going on. There's other ways to analyze the market, of course, but this is just what I'm bringing forward here. You can see that there's a lot of individuals who are involved in AI, and so really there's a lot of decentralization involved in innovation around AI, but at the same time we've got a lot of very big players. So if you can see from the left side of my screen here, the key players, 8 out of 10 are from Chinese companies, state-run companies. I think 3 of them are universities, and you've got IBM in the mix. And then if you look at the right side, the key players excluding China, you've got IBM, Samsung, and all the big sort of behemoths that are involved essentially. And one thing that we found when we're doing our research is, China has set forth this goal that they want to put themselves out there as the AI, global AI leader. And what they have is a strong culture of collaboration we've found between universities, technology giants, and government entities, with notable examples being state-owned enterprises like State Grid Corporation of China. So my question to you now is, really, what's the best practices and key considerations that will allow Canadian companies and researchers to thrive in the AI space? And so I want to ask you, is collaboration the key thing that we should be thinking of? And in that respect, is it collaboration? Should we be thinking of the big players and with government, or can we somehow involve, the SMEs and a lot of other organizations into such collaboration? And so I'll put that out there to you. How are we best positioning ourselves to make things work in the AI sector in Canada? And I'll start with Andres on this one.
Thank you. So I don't know if we have the answer, right? So these are big questions, and I think only time will tell us whether we have the right answer or not. But I can tell you what we are doing in this space. So the way that we have framed our collaboration with companies is we have 30 of the largest Canadian corporations, basically, that are working with us in long-term agreements, right? So basically, these partnerships are it's a 10-year contract that we have with 5 years, basically an exit clause. So you can think of it as a 5-year at least agreement. But companies are signing something that is very it's a long-term vision. In addition to them, we have between 200 and 300 small companies that tend to be not AI-centric, right? So they are basically, they are focused on whatever their business line is. So for example, one of the examples that we like to mention is a mushroom grower, right? A mushroom farmer. And of course, they are mushroom-centric, not AI-centric, but they want to use AI to try to improve their production, for example. And then we have a bunch of other companies, like I think the number is between 30 and 50 right now, that are focused on, that are AI-centric. So there you have companies like Cohere and basically all the ones, private AI and so on, that are basically at the core of the Canadian cycle of creating value from AI. And what we're doing with them is we're trying to engage with them on trying to facilitate this knowledge transfer. Basically, what we're trying to do is to facilitate their exploration of the latest AI techniques. Exploring AI is always risky in the sense that we don't have a good theory of why AI works, and by that I mean it's not necessarily clear when you look at a problem and you look at the data set without trying. It's not immediately clear whether a specific technique is going to work or not. Typically, you need to go ahead and try it, and then you'll see how good the performance is. So what we try to do basically is we try to decrease the risk of that exploration by facilitating, basically decreasing the total cost. We give them access to code, we give them access to data sets and tutorials and so on. But then we also put them together to work with our researchers, our AI engineering team, and so on, that can help them to try to understand how these specific techniques can be used for their own specific use cases, right? So each of them bring their own use cases, and we work with them on project management for AI to try to help them navigate the challenges. And then we also work with them on the technical side to try to help them find what is the best fit between these techniques, as I'm saying, and their needs. So that is the approach generally that we're following. Right?
Mhm.
I hope that answers your question.
No, it's very good because I think that you're suggesting that collaboration is very important, and you're trying, I think for our audience, it's important for them to know that, if they're a SME, a startup, smaller company, that there are opportunities for them to work with some of the bigger companies and researchers and to get help from organizations like yours to put them in the right direction, to incorporate AI. So that's good. Adam?
Yeah, to answer the question directly, I think collaboration is critical, but I come at it at a slightly different angle, which is I think it's a necessary thing to do because my main goal, my main driver is to get machine learning and AI into the real world. And so I think the most effective way to do that is these broad scale collaborations. And I'm a professor, so I can make fun of professors. And one thing I'll tell you about professors is they don't typically collaborate. They really like to work alone with their students. And they don't typically focus on moving things into the real world. Like I make jokes that people down the hallway have shared an office wall for 20 years and they work in the same area and they don't publish together. That's what profs do, right? And if you want to really push the technology out, then you do have to engage with the real world. You have to engage with companies that actually have real problems. And that's just not a professor dreaming in their office alone. It's engaging a wider network of people with skills. And I've recently been doing that. I've been working in water treatment, and it's such a beautiful thing because I work on water treatment for a bit, and then I realize here are the 3 pain points for deploying reinforced learning, which is my area of expertise, into the real world. And now I can go back to my lab and tell my students, these are the topics we're going to work on because they matter for water treatment. And that's going to feed into the commercialization side, and that's going to feed into, making water treatment more effective. And so I literally think this is the future of AI research. I think we need to be close to the real world to make sure our research is well aligned and we're, being part of this society change that's hopefully going to make things way better.
So how do you feel? I mean, you have been out there working with, different, say, SMEs, companies with the technology, the actual application of it. So what are the steps we should be taking to make sure that our researchers, the professors are actually, do they need a mandate to actually try and get their sort of innovations out there and work with SMEs? Is that what we need to be doing?
I don't think we do a mandate, just because researchers are a lot like cats. Like if you close the door, then they just want to go through the door. And so we want to incentivize people and say, there's funding opportunities this way. You can scale up the impact of your work. And more of my young colleagues are thinking this way, and more of my grad students. My grad students now come to me and say, I want to work on a project that matters because I want to use ML in the real world. So I think the change is actually happening. It's just these things take time. And I think CFAR is an excellent network to do this. Like CFAR has areas of strategic focus like energy and the environment. It's hard to imagine doing energy and the environment research without touching the real world, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think this is happening, and we're just going to see more of it.
Right, thanks. And Frederick, I know you have a lot of universities there in Quebec, a lot of researchers there who are working together on AI. Maybe you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, when I see the names of the companies on the slide, so the IBM, Samsung, Microsoft of the world, Mila is actually working with 6 out of the 10 right now. But the difference is that we're really working in an open science framework. So there's often no patent clauses in our agreement. And it's not always been easy to negotiate with these guys who, as you can see, are focusing on patent. But this is how Mila decided to work with, especially with international organization. And what that means in practice is that everything will be shared openly with all of the community. So GAN was actually invented at Mila. Some of the attention mechanism, which led to ChatGPT, was also invented at Mila. And then to add to what Adam was saying, what we did a little differently is we have a team of internal scientists who are not associated with universities. So they are Mila employees. And this is the team that work mainly with companies, Canadian companies, both from a consulting perspective. So we'll have a program where we give between 25 and 50 hours of consulting to Canadian SMEs. We'll apply a proof of concept between 6 and 12 months. And this is where we have a lot more flexibility in terms of IP. And we strongly believe that companies, ultimately Canadian companies, will be the one creating IP and the economic benefits for the Canadian economy. But we've decided to create our own internal team with our own employees in order to do more applied work with companies.
So you just raised a good point here. You're working with a lot of these big players out there, but how do we make sure that the economic benefit of the innovations, all the work that you're doing, stays in Canada, and that we truly are benefiting? And I don't want to get into the IP space, and patents, but it's sort of an example where the technology is often taken by the big players. We're great at sort of inventing here in Canada, but it's taken. So not from an IP perspective, but how are you guys trying to make sure that the benefits of the research is staying in Canada?
So what these guys are actually finding is the student researchers. 80% of those students are actually coming from outside of, so these companies are financing the possibility for these students to come be trained. And what we've seen, 50 and 70 students are actually after they graduate not only doing internship with Canadian entities, but also then staying in Canada and working in Canada. And that's often during those internship with Canadian entities that they do more applied work. And like I said earlier, the research that these guys are financing will be shared with all of the community, including Canadian entities, which can also benefit from that. But ultimately, we're training the next generation of talent, most of them coming from outside of Canada and then staying in Canada to work with Canadian entities. So I think we see it in a bit of a two-step process.
Okay. And Andres or Adam, I don't know if you wanted to add to that at all.
In our case, it's very similar. The numbers that we have of people staying in Ontario are even higher than the 90% of the postgraduate students that are staying. So that I would say is the main point. The second point has to do with selecting the partners, right? So again, part of what we do is we always frame these conversations as something that should benefit Canada. So we have declined some collaborations, for example, with companies where we didn't feel there was a guarantee or at least an indication that they wanted to invest in the Canadian ecosystem. So mostly we've been very selective on that front, right? So part of what we do, for example, whenever we want to sign a sponsorship agreement with companies, we ask them to actually open a lab, in particular in Ontario, to be part of this ecosystem. And basically they need to have commitments in terms of human capital that are going to be basically creating here in Canada rather than elsewhere. Beyond that, it's a difficult point because the other thing that we've seen is quite a few of our initial partners, for example, they have been acquired. So all the IP that was created eventually can be taken somewhere else, even though at the beginning you have the best of intentions and it's a fully created startup here in Canada, and they may go elsewhere anyways. So right now our focus has been human capital rather than IP itself.
Okay. And Adam?
Yeah, I would just want to add two pieces of this. So in terms of talent retainment, I graduated from the University of Alberta in 2015, and I moved to the United States because there wasn't jobs that fit my skill set, and things have changed since then. I've been able to come back. So I think this is a really important piece, and it's something I care about as a professor. In terms of how we move the needle, I think like there's lots of large tech companies that have generously invested in the 3 centers across Canada, and also they benefit a lot from Canadian AI research. So it actually makes perfect sense. But we've also seen in the round of layoffs that both Montreal and Edmonton were targets for some of those layoffs, and that's hard. And it makes sense though, right? You have a really large tech company and they need to trim. they're going to look at where they're stretched thinner. So I think a big thing, and I know that, startups being acquired is a thing, but promoting a more robust startup industry, working with Canadian companies. Like, I sit in Alberta, it is an energy powerhouse that has lots of money for research and development, and they have lots of challenging problems that we can work on to, move the needle on environmental causes, make things more efficient, make the cost of living lower. Like, even just talking to, companies that produce the water in Edmonton to drink, if we can help them save money, they can make water cheaper for Edmontonians. And that's actually, some of the things they're interested in. So I think we do have to focus on things that are in Canada already, because they want to stay in Canada. They have a footprint, they have a connection there. And I think that's important, not just to always try to attract big companies from Silicon Valley, because that won't be as permanent.
Mm-hmm. I think that's some great points. I think I'll just switch topics a little bit, in the sense of, I think we have a lot of audience members who are maybe just wanting to get into AI or learn a bit more. And so they hear a lot about generative AI, Chat GPT and Bard and that. How can SMEs or organizations in general start to incorporate AI, like generative AI, in their operations, and particularly in a responsible / ethical manner? Frederick?
Well, maybe the first thing I'd like to say about this is this has been very transformational in the sense that projects that were taking us between 9 and 12 months would probably take us between 3 and 6 months now, given how the technology has improved. So it made it easier from a pure algorithmic perspective, but it made it a bit more complicated from a governance perspective, because, for example, are these pre-trained model, do they have copyright issues? Do they have maybe private data issues as part of the training data? So there are a certain number of extra considerations from a governance perspective, but it made it a lot easier, at least from an algorithmic perspective. They can do more, they can be better fine-tuned in a shorter amount of time. So I feel that for most SMEs, this is a very good time. If you haven't really looked at AI yet, this is probably the best time to do it, because they have been transformational from an algorithmic perspective, and then we can do a lot more in a shorter amount of time. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Andres, how do you tell SMEs, they come to you, they want to start incorporating AI somehow? What do you tell them? What do you tell them?
It's a journey. So basically, there is one. I mean, what Frederick was mentioning is absolutely true. The current wave of AI that basically was made public with ChatGPT, all of a sudden decreased the technical requirement to do something with AI. It doesn't mean that you necessarily know what you're doing, which is a risk, right? But the reality is that the barrier of entry to actually get something done decreased significantly. So from that perspective, the opportunity to do basically to create a product today is more, it's easier than ever. The most likely scenario is that it's going to continue to get even easier. What you want to do is to try to get things, basically, you want to get that expertise sooner rather than later, because it will take you a time, I don't know, at least several months, if not several years, to fully build the capabilities inside your organization to be able to do this in a sustainable way. So Frederick's point about, hey, this is the best time to take a look into this, it's absolutely true. And we see that basically we went from having, I think, around 50 companies, small companies in that were asking about our Fast Lane program, which is the one for small companies, to having, I think the current number is over 300 now in months, right? And that's because GenAI has brought it to everyone's forefront. And the only caveat that I would highlight again is, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you're really that you really know what's happening behind the scenes. So just be sure that when you're doing it responsibly. Otherwise, you are going to have a lot of IP restrictions, as Freddie was mentioning. You're going to introduce products that are biased in ways that are unintended, and you could be creating potential challenges for yourself along the way and for your customers.
Yeah, great. Adam?
When I talk to companies, I typically try to get them to focus on right problem, right solution. So many companies have many different problems that could be addressed with AI and machine learning. And you know, the world is very trendy and things like that. So people just say, okay, I want to use large language models somewhere. And what you have to say is like, well, what are your key problems? What are the ones that will make the biggest difference for your company? And which ones do you have data for? And which ones, you know, have safety constraints or not? Like, I work in reinforcement learning, and kind of the joke in consulting and reinforcement learning is companies will come to you and say, can I use reinforcement learning for this? And you always say, no, actually, you have a supervised learning problem. Reinforcement learning can't help you at all, or it would be a bad idea. And so we really try to get people to think about what are the low-hanging fruit. And in the context of my specialization in reinforcement learning, there's another layer to this question, which is safety. So reinforcement learning systems interact with the world, and they figure out how to control things like pumps in a water system. Now you have to start thinking about safety. Like, can the system break the pumps? Can the system make it so the water treatment plant no longer makes water for the town? So there's a difference between a Q&A system that you plug into your business and something that you have a physical manifestation of. And so there's a whole new set of questions when we start allowing our AI systems to take control of physical systems that I think is a huge opportunity, but also we have to think about it very, very carefully.
So are there any sort of, to start then, you know, there's all these different issues, you know, that you guys are raising, and you're saying you got to start now, essentially. Look into it, see the possibilities, and start, you know, experimenting almost with it. Do you have any training or resource recommendations that you can share with our audience that would allow them to better understand how they should start thinking about incorporating AI into their business? And I know, Frederick, I think you'd mentioned a couple things to me, some publicly available ones. Maybe if you could share some comments in that respect.
Yeah, so the way we looked at training at Mila, there is a tremendous amount of training available online, free of charge on some website like Deep Learning, for example. And this is actually what we use even internally in my team to train some people internally. I have a machine learning background, but most of my colleagues don't have it. One area where we've seen maybe a bit more of an opportunity to develop our own training is on the governance side, the responsible AI side. So we have about 15 people at Mila looking at AI governance. So we've developed this, we call it the Trail program. So it's a training specific on responsible AI. So this is one that we felt that made sense for us to develop internally. But most of the, at least basic technical, and even I've seen one on generative AI for everyone that's just coming out as we speak. And this is the one that we'll use internally for our own employees. So tremendous amount of possibilities online. And then when it comes to governance and responsible AI, we felt that Mila, Vector, and Amy as a role to play, being neutral, I would say, because we've seen other training from other groups, but we feel that as AI Research Institute funded by the government, we have a role to play even more on the responsible AI front, and this is one of the area where we've put a lot of focus.
So what are the sites, you know, let's say in the public sphere where our audience members could go to look up some of this stuff? And can they access some of your programs at Mila as well?
Yeah, so the main website is deeplearning.org, I believe. I believe it's a .org, and it was created by Andrew Ng, who was one of the first AI researchers in the past. So that's one that is free of charge. And our trail program is actually in person in Montreal over a few weeks. So we're scaling it up with industry now. We've done a few rounds with academia, one of them with industry, and we're scaling up that trail program. But this is a program that would be done in person in Montreal in early 2024.
Okay, Adam.
Yeah, lots of stuff happening in the education space, and I totally agree with Frederick. So, Amy has an ML Foundations program, which is targeted towards people working in industry, wanting to scale up on knowledge of machine learning and how it can interact with their work, and it's taught with the lens of thinking you're in industry, you're in business, and those are the things that matter. It's not a program that you would see at a university. At the university side, like I said, we're developing this AI for everyone course that will be delivered across campus, and the hope is to roll that out further beyond campus, actually, to across Canada. But even like a resource like deeplearning.org and also Coursera, a few years ago I made a specialization on reinforcement learning, which is available to anyone in the world. It's 4 courses, and my view of it is, if you have some basic understanding of Python programming, you can take 4 courses in that sequence, and you can get to the point where you are ready to start thinking about reinforcement learning in the wild, in deployment. And over 80,000 people have taken that specialization over the years. It's available free to everyone at the University of Alberta, and it's part of Coursera's subscription model. So, if you're already a person who takes courses at Coursera, usually that will just be a thing that you can select and go through. So I think there's wonderful resources out there, and I think we're just in a wonderful time where people can access these things and really start learning from scratch. It's beautiful.
Oh, it's fantastic. Andres?
Yeah, on our end, it's similar. Again, as I mentioned, we work with a lot of small companies. So our program, for example, is free because it's funded by the federal government. So basically, if you're a company with less than 500 employees, please reach out. And basically, through the program, what we do is we have access to all our regular programming. For example, last week we were having discussions. Basically, it was a 3-day event that we were having with all of our sponsors, talking about generative AI. And basically, there were 3 work streams. One was on technical considerations, another one was on governance and control functions, and the other one was on business and strategy. So what we do for that type of things, for example, is just have an open conversation where we bring in experts and we have roundtable discussions and workshops and all that type of thing. So there is always something going on. But yeah, I fully agree with what both Adam and Frederick are saying. There is a ton of resources. If you as an individual, you want to become proficient in these techniques, you can literally Google and find lots of very good quality resources. If you want, on our end, I think the challenge that we are identifying is more at the organization level, because the question now is, for example, what is the right type of audit function that you need? What is the right type of compliance? What happens from a legal perspective? So those are topics that are a little bit more nuanced. So that is where we've been focusing more.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to get one more quick question out there, because I know we want to leave some questions to the audience and that. But Andres, you mentioned this a little earlier when you're providing some comments, and that relates to the issue of bias. And I've read a lot of articles recently associated with machine learning that talks about how human bias in data sets, for example, in health diagnosis, can be problematic. So for our audience and any SMEs who are looking to use AI, let's say on their own data sets or those of others, knowing bias or human errors are a part of our data sets. How do they deal with this issue? What's the best way for you to proceed? Andres?
Yeah, so I was sharing yesterday a story with you about the how these biases are actually so prevalent, and they're basically difficult to identify. The example that I was sharing was one in medical imaging, where the team basically had identified that the system had biases, and they were trying to figure out where they were coming from. And they were using data from different hospitals, and one of the hospitals was very racialized in terms of the demographics, and was generally in a poor area of the city, and the standard of care was lower than in the other hospitals. So they knew that the data was biased from that perspective, but then they were seeing that was also in the data set. So they were trying to identify, hey, I have images coming from both hospitals. And if I ask, or for many hospitals, but the point is, if I ask the machine, or sorry, the algorithm, to try to guess which hospital this image is coming from, the machine was perfect at identifying that. They started removing all the things that they anticipated could be giving an input to the signal, basically, to the algorithm. Like, for example, labels or names, maybe the font was giving some sort of insight to the machine. So they started removing all of that, and the machine was still being able to do it. Eventually, after they went through a bunch of different tests, they realized that the problem is that the lens of the machines, they have micro defects. Those micro defects were actually giving enough signal to the algorithm that the algorithm was identifying which machine, which X-ray machine was the one that was capturing the image. So those were invisible to the eye, right? So what I'm trying to say is the machines get to a level that goes beyond what we can detect often. So it's a very important consideration. Even when we don't notice that there is an unwanted bias, it may be there. So testing, that's the very first thing that I would recommend. There are lots of statistical tests that you can do to try to identify where biases come, what types of biases are. And then again, there is a bunch of statistical techniques to try to correct for those biases. But and typically there is a trade-off between the performance of your prediction and the removal of that bias. But the point is, it's a decision that the business needs to make in terms of whether it makes sense to go through that effort or not. But the point is, don't be unaware, right? Don't just let it be there because you don't know that there is a bias.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. And Frederick, Adam, like, is there any other way you've come across of tackling this as well? Can we have clean data sets to use? Should we be doing deep learning in a different way? Like, how do we deal with this issue of bias or errors?
Yeah, maybe something I can add. We've had a project called Biasly at Mila for over 3 years now, working on, initially we wanted to tackle gender bias and racial biases, but this is a lot more complicated in text. So we were focusing on text, and it turns out to be a lot more subtle, a lot more difficult. So we've extended this research project for another 2 years, and ultimately we want a tool that people can use to detect and correct. And now we're focusing only on gender biases because it can be very subtle. So we have teams of machine learning experts and linguists working on this, most likely for another year or two, because it's very subtle. Andres mentioned a few statistical tools that can do the trick, but we didn't find anything that could really automatically detect bias and correct on, let's say, text of a certain length. So we're continuing this research, and the goal ultimately will be to share that with the community, because it is a very difficult topic, a very subtle topic, especially in text. So still work in progress, at least from a research perspective.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Adam, I don't know if you want to add anything. I think we got about 30 seconds, a minute to go before we should ask the audience if they have any questions.
Sure. I just like to highlight that technological innovation often shines a light on problems we already have in our society. And so this is a really important problem, and it's highlighting, the way we collect our data, and the fact that the way we sort through resumes already has deep biases, and it's really, really bad. And so we should embrace this challenge and be happy that something has shined a light on it so that we can focus on it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jen, I think I want to turn it over to you for a second for any questions.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. Just as we get some of the questions coming in, one thing I wanted to touch upon, just based for all of you, and Jeff, this also goes to you too, with the organizations that you're working with, is do you sort of have some examples, of lessons learned, from organizations that you've sort of seen that have adopted, AI sort of well, and maybe some less successfully, and maybe, what some of those reasons were based on what you guys have touched upon? I think that would be super helpful as folks are thinking about where to start. So some of that would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Frederick, if you wanted to start.
Yeah, maybe just a piece of general advice for organizations that I've seen that have been successful. I've started working with the users from the get-go and focusing a lot on change management, because nowadays it's not so much a technology problem, it's more an acceptance problems. And so we've seen people saying, Fred, I know the algorithm, people are just not using it. So they really started from scratch to sit down with the users, the ultimate users, and have this change management program. So both the three of us are coming from technical AI Research Institute, but this is more of a non-technical advice that's critical for the adoptions of AI. And we've seen, for example, utility companies were having a lot of success, but really starting from the user from the get-go, because from a pure algorithmic perspective, it wasn't that complicated. So that's maybe just a general piece of advice that I've seen for success stories in adoption.
Andres?
Yeah, because I agree with that piece of advice. The other one that I would add is the selection of the use case is quite important. And by that, I mean, you want to start with something that is relevant, but it's not risky, right? So basically, you don't want to go and do your very first thing, something that is going to impact customers, because the problem with AI is that you have people typing on computers, so you think, yeah, it looks like IT. But the reality of things is the controls that you need to impose on your algorithms is not the same. And it's not that it's rocket science. I mean, quite a few things are relatively simple and you can just go and adapt them. The problem is if you go and do something that is brand new to your organization, you may not have those processes in place. Like, for example, a business continuity plan. Right? If you go back to the beginning of the pandemic, if you were using a machine learning algorithm when the behavior of everyone changed overnight, your algorithm was going to be giving you awful predictions right away, right? When you have rules, typically it's a little bit easier to just tweak a parameter here or there, and you can get something that works relatively nice. With machine learning, if you don't have the data, it may be really difficult to get that tuning. So all of that is just to say you need to know what you're doing. And by that, I'm not talking about you as an individual. I'm talking about you as an organization. And that means that whatever is your first use cases, typically try to make them internal, try to make them in an area where you have enough backups. And it's a way for you to include the people that are going to be paying attention to risk, that are going to be paying attention to all the things that can go wrong, because some things will go wrong. It's part of learning, right? But once you learn, you learn. So just don't make the learning something that can kill you. That's the point.
Adam?
And maybe I'll just talk about the flip side of this, because there's a good amount of positivity there, which is I had colleagues in the US that did a startup company where they wanted to build a general purpose machine learning solution. And they approached companies in a variety of industries. And they said a lot of the initial conversations with the CTOs, the COOs, and CEOs were great. And like at the end of the meeting, they're like, let's change our industry together. And then the next meetings were with the engineers that actually ran the systems and where the algorithms hit the metal. And there was massive conflict and misunderstandings. And so that's what it looks like when it's not done well, because, someone can say, yeah, let's look into this, but the people that day-to-day work on these systems, they have the expertise in what matters. And so it's really just amplifying what the other two have said. This is a people relationship problem, and it's critical.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. And I think going in that thread, one of the questions coming in is, looking at it from the people org side is, how can we recruit and convince, these organizations and, sort of large, small, regardless of size, Canadian non-AI companies to come and share these problems, to be able to apply AI sort of to their real world problems. Do you see a hesitation or sort of, some of those best practices again, if they're looking at this kind of overwhelmed by where to start, what they can do?
I have an answer. I think we as a Canadian AI community, we need to build success stories. I think that's the way we move forward. We need to say, look, we've done these projects in Canada, and they've been safe, they've been fair, and they've made a difference, and they've made the world a better place. And so I think when we build our portfolio in Canada and say that this technology is ready to move into the real world and make a difference, because there are companies already out there. Like I work with ISL Engineering in the town of Drayton Valley. The town of Drayton Valley is not a large city. It's outside of Edmonton, but they're very interested in revolutionizing how their water treatment works, and they have a state-of-the-art facility. And so there's willing people out there, and we can work with them. And then, from the operators up to the person who runs the plant, they're all excited of how AI can help them because they need help. And so we identify these willing partners, we build a portfolio of success, and then I think things just get easier every year.
Yeah. Frederick?
Yeah, what this reminds me of, we had this event, an annual event in Montreal about AI adoption, and I'm remembering what it was 5 years ago, where you were discussing about proof of concept and testing and so on. And we've seen tremendous change in the last 5 years. There's a specific funding program that funded over 100 projects in Montreal just this year, real adoption. So this is already happening. There's been quite a change in the last 5 years, and you know, we mentioned China and the US were maybe a bit more advanced on the adoption side, but we see Canadian entities really putting a lot more emphasis on adoption. Mila, Vector, and Amy as well. So I just say let's keep at it. Let's keep going, because yes, the change is actually happening as we speak.
Great, Andres.
Maybe the only piece that I would add is think of what happened, for example, when the internet started, right? If you had gone to any company and you would have told them, hey, the internet is going to change the way you do business, companies typically were saying, yeah, I don't see that. The reality is this technology in many ways, it's similar in the sense that it enables to build businesses on top of the technology. It encapsulates a lot of the complexity of getting 1,000 things done. But exactly in the same way as the internet took a while to be truly a transformation, the same thing is going to happen with this. I mean, it's going to start in very niche specific areas, and it's going to evolve from there. I don't see much hesitation. What I see is sometimes people don't stick around long enough, right? I think they are very open to try it, but they don't necessarily are aware that it's not a magic wand, right? It's something that you're going to build, it's going to develop into something, and it's going to end up touching pretty much all the different areas in a similar way of what the internet has done. If you ask in any organization who is in charge of the internet here, it's kind of a nonsensical question. In a way, I would expect that to apply also to AI at some point, right? But yeah, it's going to take a while.
Thank you for that. I know that there's a number of questions that have come in sort of specifically around, if there's case studies or sort of certain URLs and resources that we can share, some of which you guys have all sort of spoken to. So following the webinar, we'll include that sort of with some of the links that you guys have. But sort of in this last bit, as we're about to close, something I wanted to ask you is, in addition to what you've spoken about, from an organizational side, is how do organizations sort of deal with some of the backlash or resistance, that they may face, internally from their own sort of, stakeholders, or externally as they want to go out and sort of do this? Do you have pieces of advice for them as they're having these discussions and how to navigate that?
Well, maybe I can start. So I did mention including the users from the get-go. One thing I've seen in some of the companies that might answer, I believe it was Adam who mentioned the CEOs were on board, but the rest of the employees were not. So 80% of the people involved in the project add that as part of their KPIs. So this is something that we've seen. The company in question was showing the org chart and saying all of these people now have the adoption of AI as part of their KPI. So that's one of the ways that they found to align interest from everyone in the organization, to make it a bit easier, a bit more acceptable. That's one thing that I've seen in one of the success stories here.
Yeah, I think it's really important to focus on the good we can do. There's a whole other conversation about dangers and risks and stuff like that, and that's a valid conversation, but I don't think it's the conversation for today. But like, I have colleagues that work on adaptive prosthetics for people who have low limb amputation. Like, that's just something where someone can be given a better quality of life by using AI technology. I talk about water treatment, and it's not, there's so many good conversations and so many good problems that we can solve that aren't about replacing people at all. Like, the operators in my plant want more time to do other things. We don't want to replace them. We want to be able to let them do other things. And I really do see a lot of this as, there's so many ways we can look at AI as a tool. It's very easy to get distracted on this conversation of AI taking over the world and the singularity and all this stuff. But the reality is the technology we have today is really good at making tools to make the world safer, more profitable, greener. And that's the way we should be looking at this, at least focusing on those things while, also worrying about the other things.
I like to, because I fully agree with Adam said, I think the overall message of AI is extremely optimistic, actually. I like to see all of these concerns around AI, similar to what happened with the year 2000 bug, that basically, I mean, definitely if nobody does nothing about it, I mean, if it is really something that we ignore completely, bad things could happen. The reality is there is a lot of people that are putting a lot of effort into avoiding that, including the 3 institutes. So my hope is that eventually it will become a non-issue. Of course, it means that people need to do something about it today. But the message here is not about, hey, let's paralyze basically let's get paralyzed on adoption of AI because of all of these issues. It's okay, let's take a proactive approach to try to mitigate those risks. But again, I think it's also irresponsible not to take advantage of all the benefits that AI can bring and in terms of improving people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Jen, I think we're probably at an end here.
Out of time, yeah. I was just gonna say thank you very much sort of for ending with that, because I think, yeah, it's definitely an important sort of piece, in navigating all of this and setting sort of those baselines for people to move forward. So on behalf of Digital, as I hand it off to Zane, thank you to everybody for carving out this time. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we look forward to follow-ups, over the coming months and forward. So Zane, now I hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Jen, and thank you to our panel. To everyone for joining us today, hosted by Digital and our wonderful IP manager, Jen. Thank you very much for taking the time. The recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel and our website in the next couple of days. And all those attending today will receive a follow-up email with any of the resources discussed throughout this session. And that is it from Digital, and see you at the next session. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.